Hello, and welcome to this podcast where we will be looking at the growth structure of the brain. I will just explain a few things while we are drawing the brain up here. There are two ways that you can look at the anatomy of the brain. The first is the gross anatomy, which is basically just how the brain appears as you look at it. The second is by discussing the anatomy of the brain in terms of its function. In this scheme, you divide the brain into its various areas based on its function. However, for today's purpose, we'll just focus on gross anatomy. As you can see, the brain is being drawn currently for you, and you'll notice that as you look at the brain, there are a number of grooves and raised areas. I like to liken this to valleys and mountains. The technical terms for these are gyri and sulci, with the mountains, i.e. the raised areas, being called gyri, and the lower areas, i.e. the valleys, being called sulci. Okay, so there are a number of sulci and gyri on the brain surface that you can see, and these all have specific names. Perhaps the most important in localizing where you are in the brain is the central sulcus, which is just being shown now. In front of the central sulcus, you will find the precentral gyrus. This is the raised area pre the central sulcus, hence its name. On our diagram, this is highlighted in yellow. Similarly, there is another mound behind the central sulcus, being highlighted for you now in green. This is behind the central sulcus, so we refer to this gyrus as the postcentral gyrus. Being highlighted for you now in blue is the superior frontal gyrus. Now being highlighted in a pinky purple is the middle frontal gyrus. And finally, below that, now being highlighted in a darker blue, is the inferior frontal gyrus. Another important sulcus divides what we term the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe. On this diagram, basically, the big bit that sticks out and the smaller bit that sticks out. This is called the lateral sulcus. Below the lateral sulcus, being highlighted in red, is the superior temporal gyrus. There are 3 gyri in the temporal lobe, and this being the highest is called the superior temporal gyrus. Below this, now being highlighted in a blue colour, is the middle temporal gyrus. Then further below this, now being highlighted in a beige colour, is what we refer to as the inferior temporal gyrus. So to summarise, in the temporal lobe, you have the superior temporal gyrus, the middle temporal gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus. We now move towards the back of the brain. Here, in the parietal region, there are 2 lobules. The superior one being called the superior parietal lobule, highlighted for you in orange, and then the inferior one being called the inferior parietal lobule, now being highlighted in mauve. Below this is the transoccipital sulcus, and then below that is the lateral occipital sulcus. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast, and we hope that you have found it useful.